Dan Simon today, it's a relatively recent review. Dan Simon did the invisible gorilla stuff, and he was looking, because there's all these companies that claim that these online brain training exercises can produce cognitive improvements, and he reviewed the literature again, and I've reviewed that literature like 6 times in the last 15 years because I keep hoping that someone will crack the problem, but it's always the same answer. It's like, you do brain training games, you get better at the game, a lot better at that game. You get slightly better at similar games, but distal games that are still heavily cognitively loaded doesn't affect your performance at all. Zero, none. So the issue of how to raise IQ, man, that's a killer. No one knows how to do it. I can tell you how to stop your IQ from decreasing as you get older. That's not so bad, because it does that. Fluid IQ decreases from the time you're 20 and pretty rapidly. It's physical health is the best preventative. So exercise, physical exercise. Weirdly enough, you know, you think, well, why? Well, your brain uses oxygen like mad, right? And it needs to be kept clean and well oxygenated. And physical exercise, both like weightlifting, so anaerobic and aerobic exercise both seem to be very, very effective at staving off cognitive declines across the lifespan. So that's a really useful thing to know, because that's the only thing we know that does that. So then the next best predictor of lifetime success is conscientiousness. Well, so, and of the 2 aspects of conscientiousness, say orderliness and industriousness, the better predictor is industriousness. So the question is, well, what can you do about your industriousness? And the answer to that is, well, that's kind of rough too, because there's a strong genetic component. But you can work on micro habits with regards to your conscientiousness. And I think the best micro habits, this is partly to do with this future authoring program processes, I think the best thing you can do with regards to your conscientiousness is to set up some aims for yourself, goals that you actually value. And the future authoring program helps people do that. And basically, it does a situational analysis of, it helps you do a situational analysis of your life more than a psychological analysis, I would say. And so the questions are something like, well, all right, you're going to have to put some effort into your life. And you need to be motivated to do that. And so what are the potential sources of motivation? Well, you could think about them in the big 5 manner. You know, if you're extroverted, you want friends. If you're agreeable, you want an intimate relationship. If you're disagreeable, you want to win competitions. If you're open, you want to engage in creative activity. If you're high neuroticism, you want security. Okay, so those are all sources of potential motivation that you could draw on, that you could tailor to your own, you know, your own personality. But then there are dimensions that you want to consider your life across. And so we ask people about, well, you know, if you could have your life the way you wanted it in 3 to 5 years, if you were taking care of yourself properly, you know, what would you want from your friendships? What would you want from your intimate relationship? How would you like to structure your family? What do you want for your career? Well, how are you going to use your time outside of your job? And how are you going to regulate your mental and physical health, and maybe also your drug and alcohol use? Because that's a good place to auger down, you know, because alcoholism, for example, wipes out, you know, 5 to 10% of people. So you want to keep that under control. And then so maybe, you know, you develop a vision of what you would like your life to be, and that associates the goal. Well, once the goal is established, and then you break down the goal into micro processes that you can implement, the micro processes become rewarding in proportion, in relation to their causal association with the goal, and that tangles in your incentive reward system. You know, we talked about the dopaminergic incentive reward system, and that's the thing that keeps you moving forward. And the way it works is that it works better if it produces positive emotion when it can see you moving towards a valued goal. Okay, well, what's the implication of that? Better have a valued goal, because otherwise you can't get any positive motivation working out. And so the more valuable the goal, in principle, the more the micro processes associated with that goal start to take on a positive charge. And so what that means is, well, you get up in the morning and you're excited about the day. You're ready to go. And so as far as I can tell, what you do is you specify your long-term ideal. Maybe you also specify a place you want to stay the hell away from, so that you're terrified to fail as well as excited about succeeding, because that's also useful. You specify your goal. You do that in some sense as a unique individual. You want to specify goals that make you say, oh, if that could happen as a consequence of my efforts, it would clearly be worthwhile. Because the question always is, why do something? because doing nothing is easy. You just sit there and you don't do anything. That's real easy. The question is, why would you ever do anything? And the answer to that has to be because you've determined by some means that it's worthwhile. And then the next question might be, well, where should you look for worthwhile things? And one would be, well, you could consult your own temperament. And the other would be, well, you kind of look at what it is that people accrue that's valuable across the lifespan. So you do a structural analysis of the subcomponents of human existence, and I already did that. You need a family, you need friends. Like, you don't need to have all these things, but you better have most of them. Family, friends, career, educational goals, plans for, time outside of work, attention to your mental and physical health, etc. That's what life is about. And if you don't have any of those things, well, then all you've got left is misery and suffering.
Yeah, no, I want to come back also to what you were saying about the predictive power of IQ and conscientiousness, which I don't dispute, and I'm also not one of these people who suffers under the delusion that these things are totally, open quotes, socially determined, close quotes. I mean, I understand and believe that they have high heritability and identifiable genetic sources in that variability and so on. But, the standard old joke used to be, you can tell me because you know more about personality psychology than I do, the standard old joke used to be that everything's 50% heritable, that pretty much anything that you can measure as a trait that has any stability within the lifetime also turns out to have a heritability somewhere near 0.5. But there's the other 0.5. Some people have low IQs because they were exposed to too much lead in infancy. I believe that conscientiousness can probably be, I believe you suggested earlier that we know something about this already, about developmental determinants of shifts in conscientiousness. And we have to caution ourselves against talking about these individual difference factors as if they are immutable attributes of individuals that are going to undermine any sort of progressive improvement of circumstances for people, or are going to create bad byproducts of attempts to produce social justice. It's just going to, you're going to leave your dumb, unconscientious people out there being parasites or something.
Well, there is, of course, decent evidence that there are sociocultural effects on IQ. I mean, the Flynn effect, which is named after the man who described the phenomena, indicates that the average IQ has been increasing quite substantially over the last 100 years. And the reason for that, no one knows for sure, but one of the putative reasons for that is that we've lifted the bottom out of catastrophe. So there aren't people whose IQs are stunted by exposure to zero information during critical developmental periods and who didn't get enough to eat.
Yeah, so I was going to say severe malnutrition, never mind zero information. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we've wiped out, in many ways, we've wiped out the worst effects of privation. And that's increasingly true as well on the worldwide scale, worldwide stage. There's about 150,000 people a day right now being lifted out of absolute poverty by UN standards, the fastest improvement in the history of the world by a huge margin, and also about 300,000 people a day being hooked up to the electrical grid. So we are making some progress removing the absolute privation problem, which is a non-trivial problem. The problem with most of the attempts to raise IQ is that they don't change the variance in IQ. They tend to raise the average IQ across the population. And that leaves the IQ inequality problem basically untouched. So there have been studies trying to estimate how much socioeconomic pressure, let's say, you have to place on an individual to raise their IQ. Lowering it's easy, right? Because making something worse is always easier than making something better. But if I remember correctly, if you take an identical twin who's adopted out at birth, in order to produce a 15-point increase in IQ compared to the other twin, which is a 1 standard deviation increase, and about the same as the average difference between a university student in an average state college and an average high school student, you have to move the one twin from the 5th percentile of socioeconomic status to the 95th percentile. So you need about a 3 standard deviation improvement in socioeconomic conditions to produce a 1 standard deviation improvement in IQ. So it looks like it can be done, but it's expensive, you know. And
yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm kind of surprised, actually. I mean, given, you know, we just mentioned malnutrition as one possible source of low IQ, one possible developmental source. I'm kind of surprised that, to the degree that the Flynn effect might be due to things like a reduction in the number of people exposed to severe malnutrition, that it wouldn't have also simultaneously truncated the variance a little bit. That seems slightly surprising.
Well, it has. Let me restate that. It has truncated. It has truncated the variance, although the data on that isn't as clear. So, but I do believe that it's a reasonable inference to make that the variance has been truncated. It's also hidden to some degree because the IQ tests are always renormed to keep the variance at a standard 15 points.
Yes.
So it makes it difficult to look retrospectively and see what's happened to the variance. So, but the other problem too is that, you know, you get these stories now and then about these companies that come out with claims that their brain exercises can improve IQ, and the literature on that is damn dismal. I can tell you, it's that the holy grail is to produce cognitive exercises that produce a legitimate impact on fluid intelligence, and like there's been a lot of work done on that, and the answer so far is that it doesn't work.
So what about the video gaming? I mean, I know there has been this suggestion that playing video games actually improves at least some aspects of intelligence.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of studies that indicated that video games might improve spatial intelligence, but here's the problem, and I think this is a critical problem and perhaps an insoluble one, or at least no one solved it, is that what you get is that if you exercise yourself substantially on a given game, you can radically accelerate your performance in the game. So you can get much better at those specific skills.
Sure.
But you don't get generalization across cognitive sets, which is what you're really hoping for. Because
yeah, I thought that was the claim from some of these.
Yeah, well, they have shown some increases in spatial IQ, but there's not very many studies, and I would say they're far overbalanced by the other side of the research equation, which continually says, and I've looked at this because I'm really interested in the improvement of IQ. I mean, that's the holy grail in some sense, and that. The overwhelming preponderance of evidence suggests that you don't get generalization outside the narrow domain. Now, why that is, and even this, it's even worse, because you might say, well, imagine that you could take 5 different domains of intelligence, still associated tightly with G, and you had people practice routines in all 5 dimensions. Maybe you'd get generalization under those circumstances, and the results of the research attempting that indicate that no, as soon as you move away from those specific practice instances, you don't get generalization.